Okay, so for the 1962 World Cup qualifiers, 6 African nations would join, including new teams in the form of Morocco, Ghana, Nigeria, and Tunisia. Sudan and Egypt, at the time being called United Arab Republic, as they joined football associations with Syria. Both withdrew, while Ethiopia and South Africa didn't even join. Morocco and Tunisia were drawn to face each other, and what a way these two nations showed up. So Morocco beat Tunisia 2-1 in the first leg, but then Tunisia beat Morocco 2-1 in the second leg. This meant they were to play a replay match, which is basically a third match, in which the winner would go on to the next round. However, they tied 1-1, and even after extra times, and since penalty shootouts weren't really a thing until 1970s, Morocco won because of a coin toss. A coin toss. And I want you to remember that because it's going to become very important in the future. So, Ghana and Nigeria would face off in where Ghana won in the first leg 4-1, and then they tied 2-2 in the second leg, meaning Ghana would have to face Morocco. The winner of this match would go on to the 1962 World Cup international playoff match. Yeah, they weren't assured a place, but so the match itself, they would tie 1-1 in the first leg, but Morocco would take the win in the second leg with a mere 1-0. Now, they would go on to face Spain, in which Spain would win both legs, first 0-1 and then 3-2. And while they did lose, look at the scores. Just by 1 goal. And yeah, like, y'all could be like, you know what, Spain wasn't even that good, back then. Like, fair enough. But this was like one of the very first times that an African nation was actually like putting up a fight against European nations. Now, in the 1966 World Cup qualifiers, this should have been a monumental moment for Africa, as 17 nations now existed to participate. Unfortunately, things took a noise, but basically, a nosedive. First, French Congo, or modern-day Congo in today's world, was denied entry by FIFA, so that left 16. South Africa was suspended indefinitely because of apartheid, and to make matter worse, all of the remaining 15 African nations withdrew in protest of the fact that the African, Asian, and Oceanic nations were all lumped into one qualification process, where in the end, only one nation would go to the World Cup. The African nations were basically trying to make the point that football was growing in the region, and they weren't lying. For the 1966 qualifiers, with the format FIFA had drawn up, 15 teams from Africa, 2 from Asia, and 1 from Oceania were going to be part of that qualifying process. The winner of the Asia and Oceania region would have to face the winner of the African region to see who would go to the World Cup, essentially meaning that there was still a possibility that all 15 African nations could still be left out, and Africa wasn't going to accept that. And sadly, FIFA said, we ain't changing it because of competitive and logistical issues. And CAF then boycotted the World Cup and didn't participate in the qualifiers. So for the 6th time in a row, no African teams were present at the World Cup. Thankfully, however, because CAF showed the seriousness of how much they wanted an African nation at the World Cup, and FIFA realizing that no Africa at the World Cup could spell trouble in the future, things were finally going to change. For the 1970 World Cup, the change in format for the World Cup meant that Africa was now assured at least one spot in the tournament, and the qualifiers were amazing. The CAF's road to the 1970 World Cup was split into 3 groups. 11 nations participated, while Guinea and Zaire, modern-day DR Congo, were rejected entry into the qualifiers. For the first round, Ghana got a bye to the second round as they had an odd number of teams. The other 5 matches went ahead as scheduled, with 2-legged matches. Zambia and Sudan tied with an aggregate of 6-6, including after extra times. Now, this is the part where I got confused. So, Sudan ended up passing to the second round because they scored more goals in the second match. But the match well, no, not the match, but yeah, the math wasn't mathing. So, all right. In the first match, Zambia won 4-2, right? In the second match, Sudan won 3-1 in regular time, meaning that the game ended in 5-5. After extra time, the game ended with Sudan winning 4-2, the same score as the first match. So here's where I ask you for help in clarifying what rules this was, because I couldn't find anything. And one website just said a bizarre rule. Like, what was the bizarre rule? What was it? So they didn't explain it. And let me give you a second example of this. Morocco played Senegal, in which after the two matches, the aggregate was 2-2. Morocco won the first match 1-0. Senegal won the second match 2-1. And you would think that Senegal would be the one that qualified because they scored more goals in the second match. No, they didn't even play extra times. Instead, they played a third playoff match in which Morocco won 2-0. And they went on to the second round. So if anybody watching this video, knows their way through the dark web, and just find out and let me know. But yeah, so for the other three matches, Tunisia would beat Algeria with an aggregate of 2-1. Nigeria beat Cameroon with an aggregate of 4-3, and Ethiopia beat Libya with an aggregate of 5-3. For the second round, Morocco would face Tunisia in where they tied both matches 0-0, even after extra time in the second match. So they scheduled a third playoff match in which they tied once again, this time 2-2, even after extra times. Again, penalty shootouts weren't a thing yet. So what did they do? Did they play a fourth match? Did they play more extra times? Did they give birth to the golden goal rule? No. Instead, they did a coin toss, in which, once again, Morocco beat Tunisia. Imagine that your football rival isn't even a nation, it's just a coin. Alright, for the other ones, Sudan beat Ethiopia with an aggregate of 3-2, and Nigeria beat Ghana with an aggregate of 3-2 as well. The final round was a single round table in which Morocco would ultimately qualify to the 1970 World Cup after ending on top of the table with 5 points. And how did Morocco do at the World Cup? Either way, Morocco did make history as they achieved the first ever point for Morocco and for an African nation. And things would only become brighter. Now, from here on out, since more African countries would start qualifying, or joining rather, I'm going to talk more about the general key moments in each qualifiers. For the 1974 World Cup qualifiers, Zaire, modern-day DR Congo, was the one that qualified. In the first round, Zaire beat Togo, they beat Cameroon in the second round, and Ghana in the third round. In the final round, it was a single round robin tournament with 3 teams between Zaire, Zambia, and Morocco. Zaire beat Zambia twice and beat Morocco twice as well, though the second match was awarded a win to Zaire as Morocco withdrew before the match. So with that, Zaire would qualify for their first and so far only World Cup. For the 1978 World Cup, Tunisia would be the one to win the qualifiers. In round 1 against Morocco, after 2 legs, they tied 2-2. Luckily for Tunisia, penalty shootouts were finally implanted, meaning they would have to avoid their enemy, the coin toss. And it worked in their favor. Tunisia would win in penalties 4-2. In the second round, Tunisia would beat Algeria, and in the third round, they would beat Guinea with a score of 3-2. In the final single table format, Tunisia would come out on top of the table with 5 points, beating out Egypt and Nigeria. Tunisia would qualify to their first World Cup. For the 1982 World Cup, the qualifying format for CAF would change as they now were allocated 2 spots at the World Cup, since the tournament was now expanding to 24 nations. Algeria and Cameroon would make their World Cup debut. In the first round, Cameroon beat Malawi while Algeria beat Sierra Leone. For the second round, Algeria beat Sudan while Morocco beat Zimbabwe. For the third round, Algeria beat Niger while Cameroon beat Zaire. And in the final round, Algeria beat Nigeria and Cameroon beat Morocco, both matches ending with an aggregate of 4-1. For the 1986 World Cup, Algeria and Morocco would qualify, making Algeria the first African nation to attend 2 World Cups back-to-back. The qualifying format was the same as the previous edition. Morocco beat Sierra Leone, Malawi, Egypt, and Libya, while Algeria beat Angola, Zambia, and Tunisia after having a bye in the first round. For the 1990 World Cup qualifiers, the CAF qualifiers format would change again, with the first format being a two-legged knockout round, the second round being four-table group round, and the final round being the top teams of each group facing one team 2 times. So Egypt and Cameroon would be the ones to qualify. Egypt would get a bye into the second round, where they would be placed with Liberia, Malawi, and Kenya. They would win the group and face Algeria in the final round, where they would win it with an aggregate of 1-0. Cameroon would get a bye into the second round, where they were placed with Nigeria, Angola, and Gabon. They won the group and faced Tunisia, where they won with an aggregate of 3-0. So yeah, those are the first editions of Africa now finally being given that chance to really grow their football at the world stage. And so now that I got, that talking point, I'm going to be heading back to Africa and talk about the Africa Cup of Nations from the 1992 edition all the way to the modern day, the one that's going to be happening in 2024.